Hi, everyone. It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out. And today's guest, I am lucky enough to know in real life. His name is Brian Wolfe. And we are going to talk about performing while enduring. Brian is a physical therapist, among a host of other things, and very dynamic person who works with not just injured people, but athletes. And I know a lot of people in this community are undergoing tremendous stress, and they often have to perform not just in their family life, but in their jobs, whether they're professional athletes, which most of our clients are not, some of them are, or not. And so we are going to talk a lot about the impact of stress on the body and the mental effects, the physical effects, and what you can do to hopefully prevent as much as possible, as well as recover. So Brian, thanks for coming in. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you do in more detail before we get to it?
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me. So as you kind of talked about, I'm a physical therapist. I'm an in terms of, kind of my background is I've been a physical therapist for about 15 years. Orthopedic certified specialist. I work a lot in orthopedics and sports. I started my own practice about 8 years ago or so. um, and we're here in Connecticut, so we have a wide array of people that we see. But our mission as a company is really to bridge the gap between rehab and performance. And so because of that, we do a lot with high school, college athletes, and what's led us into professional athletics as well. So we do a lot of work with professional athletes for rehab for physical therapy related injuries, whether it's conservative care, soft tissue stuff, anything that you'd see traditionally in an outpatient clinic. Along with what we also do now is also, like, again, a lot more sports specific stuff. So any post surgical work as well, along with being actually with a team on the field and doing that kind of work as well. So we're in multiple different settings, doing essentially the same type of work that just skewed in different directions depending on the situation.
Yeah. Now, I love this question, and I always ask it at the beginning. What makes you so good at your job?
Passion. I heard that the other day because it's what I heard that, and it's some people that we know at another company that does very similar work to what we do. And I think a lot of times what I'm looking for now when I even hire a physical therapist to join us, that's the word, is passion. I love what I do. I love that I've created kind of my own entity that really revolves around all the things I love to do, because I think I'm much more of a person who's like wants to do more stuff than less stuff in life. And so I think that's something where it's like I got frustrated at jobs that weren't pushing me enough into other things that I wanted to do. And so, I always found that my passion for what I'm doing is what I think is, over time, I've noticed more and more. That's what people have told me. You know what I mean? It's like they're like, "Oh, you clearly love what you do," and it just kind of like oozes off of you. And
Yep.
that's the truth, right? I genuinely not only just love helping people. I grew up an athlete and was in sports, so to help people and to help people in sports was always a mission for me, and that's something that I'm the living embodiment of in doing what I'm doing. So yeah, I think that's what has helped me so much in my career.
Right. And knowing you in real life, you are very passionate. And as you know, I am as well. And we both tend to talk very quickly because we're so excited about what we do.
For sure, for sure. No,
Yeah.
and there's also comes off as intense sometimes, but it's one of those things where I definitely know I can come off intense, but it's more out of that passionate side for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, let's start talking about the mind body connection in terms of stress. So you
cool.
see physical stress. What are some common ways that stress manifests in the body, places in the body? And then we'll get into the mental effects.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mind body connection is one thing that's very very common. I think that it's funny. I was talking about this yesterday with some people and how pain works with an athlete. And I was working with an athlete who's a professional athlete, and he was talking about how when he does a specific movement with running, that he can always mimic this type of pain, and then it goes away with time as he does something. And I talked to him, and the comment that one of my other people that we were talking with, who's like a great strength and performance coach of ours, was like, it's a mind body connection, and that can be true in a lot of different ways. In this particular way, it wasn't. It was one of those things where I said, it's very physical manifestation. Um, However, what stress does in this scenario is it causes an extra load on somebody that we have to account for. So if somebody, to give you kind of an example, if someone is, an athlete that we have and is running at full speed and tweaks their hamstring, right, does a small hamstring strain, that can be due to a number of different factors. And so if we think about 100 different scenarios that a player is going to be put in a given game, match, whatever that sport, like for me, it's professional soccer is my main, as you know, is one of my main places that I work in. And so in professional soccer, if we have 100 scenarios where at a given time where someone's running on a pitch and playing in a match, and they are doing certain high load speed or high speed running, certain loads for the distance that they're doing, a specific position that they're in, specific acceleration, deceleration type movements, what they did from training in the weeks before, what they've done from the gym work before. All these are loads, and people have heard of load management. It's something we talk about. What is a tougher thing to plan for now is an added stress. So say, and this can be good stress, so eustress, or distress, right? Bad stress. And so it could be something like, I know in your field in terms of distress is, going through a divorce, going through a tough time in your marriage or significant other. Of course, that's a huge piece. And then on the flip side, also eustress. So like we've had players that have kids, right? That just had a newborn baby and now is, affecting with their sleep, and it's no different, right? So these are variables that we need to account for. And it's just a human element of that. So it's like, how do we, if and it could be, again, I've seen it with players struggling with alcoholism or drug abuse,
Mhm.
right? Like there's things like that are key. So it's no different in your world in that capacity. So it's very interesting when that happens, because that's something ultimately that we have definitely seen in the past that it plays on that aspect of an increase in injury for sure.
Yeah, that is interesting because I remember back when there were terrible moments in my marriage, I felt like I kept getting hurt over nothing, or zero would happen and suddenly my back, it was like it was killing me. I could barely get in and out of a car and I couldn't think of anything in particular that happened. Do you see people show up to you where they can't think of like a moment of impact, just suddenly they feel like they're in so much pain and they don't know why?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the vast majority of people. I mean, we're as human beings, we try and reconcile what is actually causing that problem, right? Like what caused it. And a lot of times, it's important for somebody, if they're good at what they do in my field, it's sifting through sort of the red herrings that can cause that, and getting to the root cause of the problem, right? And so there are specific orthopedic tests. Obviously, there's added stuff like MRIs and X-rays and CT scans and advanced imaging that can help as well. But in particular, there are a lot of different times where we can also, kind of sift through just by listening to who we're talking with, and the personal things they're going through. I tell people that on a regular basis, if you think about pain science, think of pain science as like a stereo system. So if your normal central nervous system pain reaction to any type of injury, or even a low grade injury, high grade injury, whatever, repetitive stress, if you will. If you can think of a stereo on a volume, like say this microphone, right, from 0 to 10,
Mm-hmm.
and we're normally, as our central nervous system is ticking around a 1 or 2, just kind of to use an analogy. We're not at 0, because if you're at 0, you're dead, right? In this analogy, right? So at a 1 or a 2, we can feel the sweatshirt on my body. I can feel the hair on my head to a degree, right? Like you can feel the earphones in my ears. So if I'm at a 1 or a 2 and I don't have any pain, but I can have feelings, that's what can happen in this scenario. Is say you're going through divorce, you're going through something along those lines. All of a sudden, what ends up happening is that stereo can get turned up to a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right, in that way. And so three things happen when that occurs, right, in a pain science perspective, right? One is you're going to feel pain a lot faster than you should, right? So you talked
Mm.
about that, like I feel that, right? So that's one scenario. Two is the pain's going to be at a much larger amplitude than it should. And that's weird, because like people say, why is it just it's hurting me so much? I can't get in and out of my car. Like, yeah, I had back pain before, but now it's so bad, right? In that
Mhm.
scenario. And then three, it'll last longer than it should. And that's those three major pieces are a significant part of pain science. And when that happens, kind of out of the context, and that's why, and this is all over the place. This also doesn't have to do with just stress, right? It can also, it's a variable in this equation. So it's one of those things where, say you're, having orthopedic injuries. Why, if you saw somebody had a rotator cuff repair, and we've all probably known somebody who's had a surgery like that, it's why somebody who typically breezed through it, or someone else who was like, oh my God, it's the worst pain I've ever had in my life. And so there's variables that go into that pain perception and that pain. It's not that it's a mind body connection and the pain's not real. The pain
Uh-huh.
is real, but what's causing that difference in that stereo, right? Why is it an 8 versus what it should be, like a maybe in that scenario post operative it should be 3 or 4 or 5, right?
Mm.
So that's the aspect that we're always evaluating, or at least myself, I'm always evaluating how that would affect. And again, any type of very stressful situation would definitely affect that
So that
adversely.
that's making me think, if someone is going through a really stressful situation, they're feeling more pain, and so it's not just a physical thing that will, like, physical therapy might not help alone. If they can figure out the source and they start getting some support in other ways, do they tend to recover faster or better because you've found the root of it and it's not just physical? Am I answering my
Yeah, no, it's great.
rhetorical
Listen,
question?
listen. There's no like real great research to suggest that. Yes, in my practical experience, in that I would say yes. I would say because and the way that I would draw that, um, draw that conclusion in a couple different ways is when they've looked at, you know, patients who have been you had very specific injuries. A classic one are like patients who have had a motor vehicle accident or a workers' comp injury. Their rehab times are much slower than those who are not on those two things. And there's a couple different factors that could be associated with that. But I do believe that one big factor in that case is generally if you get hurt at work, there's some sort of negative adverse reaction to going back to that job. And then if you
Mm-hmm.
get in a motor vehicle accident, again, there's the feeling of like, this person hit me. I've heard these patients, I've heard clients say this to me in the past, like, they're just upset about, the situation, and there's a feeling of like I want to get back at that person, or I want to, there's a negative energy associated with that, either a
That
victimization
fits
in some
with this
capacity.
community. Like,
Yes,
I need
100%.
justice. Like, why can't I have justice? I
Yes,
don't deserve this. Why are they getting away with this?
and I can understand that feeling, right? I understand that and resonate for it. But what my job is to do, and to be as a neutral party in that, right, is to help identify that person's mindset. Being like, I totally understand what you're saying, um, but that won't serve that person. And again, it's not my job to fix. My job is to fix
Right.
them physically, but I
Yeah.
think also a lot of times we end up playing that therapist role in a certain way, and it might because we've
Mhm.
built a certain rapport and trust. And
Yeah.
so what ends up happening there is those energies are a victim mindset or some form of an angry mindset. And
Mhm.
I every single person who's a human being on this planet has been in those mindsets at some point for some reason. And so it's one of those things where it's like that's not going to serve them, but it will adversely affect their rehabilitation, in my opinion, for sure. And so I
Interesting. So
think,
being angry makes it harder.
yeah, I mean, because there's a lack there of focus on the road to recovery. And
Mm.
so and again, it also, like we talked about, adds a variable to, from that stereo scenario we talked about, right? An anger that's turning you up, right, in that capacity is not something that necessarily, somebody who doesn't have that associated with their personality or their situation has to deal with, right? So it's just an added variable that's not going to serve them and can manifest and physically for sure. I would, again, there's not a ton of great research to support that, but I would say anecdotally, I would definitely say that I've seen it in the past. And the best research I can pose to is again, when you look at motor vehicle accidents and workers' comp cases, there's clear evidence that they take longer to go through normal bouts of physical therapy than others.
Yeah, and Brian, it's so fast. Every time you and I talk about this, I just find more parallels between
For
what we
sure.
do. And what you said about anger makes me think about how in our world there's a lot of people who are just really focused on anger and injustice with the legal system, and it's like they keep cycling around in that victimhood. And
Yeah.
what Chris and I try to do is say, like, we don't have control over that. Like, you are right to feel anger, but at some point we have to focus on, like you have, recovery. Like, what can we do to strategize to make this as least painful as possible, to get you through this as healthy and unscathed as possible? You're not going to get out without pain. You're not going to get out for free, but we want to just do the best we can. And that's the same thing that you're talking about, just a totally different topic.
Totally. I mean, and again, like, people, it's like I'm not a licensed social worker or psychotherapist, anything like that. Like, it's not, it's not something in my wheelhouse. But what I, in terms of like and referring and creating those connections, like we do that on a regular basis. But what I think is interesting about that topic that you just brought up is because you build such a rapport in my profession with patients. Um, I definitely find myself with more and more experience trying to help to tackle that a little bit better,
Hmm.
um, to at least get them in a better get people in a better place. And it's not like I'm trying to be their mental health coach or psychotherapist or social worker, any of that stuff, and solve their problems. And I think there's two different. It's no different than if I'm talking to my wife and she's upset with me right now. And so it's one of those things where listening and understanding and building that trust and rapport, and also not being in a rush to change it in one session. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like that's another thing that I've learned over time. That's a little more nuanced. It's just like, if someone's mindset is in that direction, is in my head. I'm like, I don't have to change that mindset today. I don't have to do that today. I can do a little bit by a little bit in helping this person. Just like if someone's had a huge knee operation like an ACL surgery, the person's not going to get better in one visit. It's going to take us
Hmm.
6 to 9 months. So it might take us a little bit of time to go through those weeds and do that. Um, but I definitely make it a point to try and address it and have the you know tougher conversation around it, because I think it's important. I don't think we're completing our rehabs if we're not doing that. Right. So even if I fix you structurally on a force plate and I see, oh, yep, your ACL is good to go, you feel great, but the person's in that negative mindset, when they go back out on the field, it's only a matter of time till something else hurts, because we've talked about that stereo system. So I'm doing the injustice of the rehab and not completing as well as I could if I don't complete the human element of this. And I think
Yeah.
that, to your point, is it's very easy to focus on. It doesn't serve you that. And it's easy for one person to say that and say it out loud. We can help be solution oriented because that's just a nature of people in general. But sometimes people don't need that. And sometimes people don't appreciate that. So it's a matter of just finding each individual and kind of approaching them in that direction every single time.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, what about like when someone's injured or in pain, how does it affect their judgment?
Got it. So you mean like in their everyday life and outside of their
Yeah.
life, or in
Yeah.
pertaining to their rehab?
Everyday life since
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very interesting question when we're starting to go outside my own scope here a little bit. But I would say, in terms of like, look, if you're somebody who's in pain or injured and having to focus on something else, right? It's no different than having a very stressful situation in the back of your mind. Like, I joke about it all the time with running my business and two young kids and juggling professional athletics and all these different things, that a lot of times if I start forgetting certain things, forgetting names, not being able to recall certain things, I'm not as sharp
Mhm.
as I normally would be.
Yeah.
And typically the reaction is, I got too many things on my plate. I got to start.
Mhm.
I got to start delegating or changing what I'm doing, prioritizing, right? And so that's more of what I would think that happens, as opposed to like the rehab, to kind of like bring that part to it. It's the same thing. It's that you're not able to focus on your rehab the way you should, and therefore it's going to affect your rehab. So when someone's like, hey, I'm not able to do the exercises regularly as I should, or I'm not able to use ice as much as I should, or I'm not able to get here when often as I should because I'm focusing on something else, you're not there's you're coming back to your original question that you had asked about, like, how does it affect your progress in rehab. That's exactly how it would happen, right? You would essentially be like, I'm focused on other things, this
Mhm.
isn't my priority right now.
Right. So like
And
being scattered.
100%. So when someone's not prioritizing, very specific things, then ultimately what you're going to do is you're going to become complacent. And so that's how I would say, in your daily life, how something like pain can cause that problem. And that's where, even if somebody's not going through something stressful, but all of a sudden they have a back injury, say I've got three young kids and now I'm trying to get up and I have a back injury, like that's the necessary need for physical therapy, to get someone back on their feet as quickly as possible so they can get back to their life as fast as possible. And so that's where I would say, in general, if someone has a stressful situation going on, how it would affect their rehab in particular.
Yeah. Again, I see so many parallels because I think it has to do with commitment to recovery in your case with the physical pain, and for us it's the commitment to the process and realizing it's not going to end quickly. And there's a lot of education and devotion that to doing things that you don't always like to do, but to learn along the way, and that it takes time and it's gradual. But those who really stay focused and need support staying focused, they do better and they feel better.
Yep, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's an essential, like, and it's not. I also don't want this to come off as calloused, right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
want it to be this thing where it's like, I don't appreciate the magnitude of what someone might be going through, and I think that is so important. I try and teach physical therapists this when they're listening, because it's important to be empathetic
Mm-hmm.
to these situations because they're tough, and I get it. Um, and it's also easy to be like, well, just stop thinking like that, right? In fact, my wife yells at me like that. So sometimes you just be like, well, just stop thinking like that, and it's like that's not
Impossible.
that's not going to make it better. That's going to make it worse, right? And
Yeah.
so being empathetic, sometimes I have actually found this, and I've actually heard this from therapists that I've worked with in the past. It's easier to be more empathetic to like a stranger than say a loved one.
Mm.
So sometimes that's what makes it really helpful to get help, is because if someone comes to me and talks to me and they're like, you must be like inundated with all these people just complaining to you about their pain all the time. And I'm like, and this is totally going to come off as callous. In my head, I'm like, no, I can help you better because I don't have an emotional connection to you. At the end of
Mm.
the day, I'm going to go home to my family and you're going to go home to yours. And, we're going to figure this out on our own. But together I can help you because it allows me to compartmentalize a little bit better. And so that's why I think it can be so effective, is because it's an easier conversation to have when you're not as emotionally invested in somebody.
Yeah.
And so it's a value that we can provide that I love being able to provide and help people a little bit more in that scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like what you keeps coming back to is that rapport and sense of trust, but there are the boundaries of the
Yes.
relationship.
100%, 100%,
Yeah.
and in your personal life too, right? Like, but 100%. That's probably one of the most important things that I try and teach. Again, it just comes with a little more experience, is because so many particularly younger physical therapists. And I work with so many young physical therapists now, whether I'm teaching at schools or whatever I'm doing. A lot of it is talking with them about how they can improve their orthopedic skill set and how they can do their examinations better and treatments better and how they do that. Um, but to your point, is that's something that might get missed by somebody who's a little younger
Mm.
in the profession. And when it's not, and then what ends up happening is you think you're doing it wrong. You're like, oh my, maybe I'm treating them wrong. Maybe I'm hurting them, right? Because it's
Mm.
so easy to take that accountability. When in reality, it's like, no, this is just something that you're missing that you can help them with in this different way that's not necessarily taught in school.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because I talk to lawyers a lot about social emotional skills, and a lot of lawyers say these are the things that we never learn in school. Like one of our friends named Rayford Palmer, who's a Chicago attorney who's been doing this for decades, he said in law school we learn it's 90% law, 10% client relations, and then in the real world it's 90% client relations and 10% law. And again, I see a parallel where it's like you have such a human career of physical therapy, it's helping someone heal their body, that you still have to be aware of those softer skills like listening and empathy. Like that really matters in careers like yours.
Totally. I used to have an old boss used to say this. She would say, there's a science of physical therapy and then there's the art of physical therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a concept that I would totally agree with, right? Like there's a science and art to this. Um, and I would put it more into like there's a social side of this in terms of what you're trying to do. And I found that I think that what's cool about that is when you can master that into a certain degree, it's what doesn't make you just super effective with treating professional athletes or athletes in general. You're treating the world in that way. You just see the world through a slightly different lens because you're approaching things from an empathetic perspective and how to then readjust. And you can also then kind of ramp it up to being like, hey, let's also think about how this doesn't serve you and how we can come with a solution oriented fix. And obviously, that's kind of my main mentality on a lot of things. So I resonate with those people faster. But I've also learned over time that not everybody's at that level right out of the gate. And so we need to then be able to adjust accordingly and find that balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm wondering about any tips to help people lead the most healthy lives, like maybe preventing injuries, or if they have them, like what are just some general things that people should consider, especially knowing that the community you're talking to is dealing with intense stress?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I, we've been around a lot of similar people at times who talk about this and how to do it. I'm a big believer in the KISS method, right? Keeping it super simple, right? And some people have a different interpretation of those last two S's,
Yes.
in terms of how that works. Um, and to me, it's very simple. It's five major things, right? The first is exercise. And I don't know if you've ever heard me talk, but exercise is one. If you're just exercising in general, and if you don't know how to exercise or intimidated by exercise, find someone who can help you, right? That's what we do every day. So that's why we do so much in fitness. So exercise in general has shown to not only increase your longevity, de-stress, improve cardiovascular health, muscle mass. Like there's the endless bounds of what exercise can do is unrelenting. So it's just one of those things where, for me, if someone's looking to do all these other kind of ancillary things, the first thing is exercise.
Hmm.
And it's hard to execute on a regular basis if you're not used to it. It's a different feeling. I've known, I've known a lot of people who have gone through a huge life event like a divorce and have thrown themselves into exercise. And
That
it's
was
been
me.
and it's one of the coolest transformations that I've watched over and over and over again. So that's the first one, right? Is
Yeah,
exercise, in my
Brian,
opinion.
physical therapy led me to a regular exercise routine. I had never been in a gym before. All these weird injuries, it was like you have to use these machines, and that's what led to a regular exercise routine. So,
That's awesome.
absolutely, I feel like that saved me.
Yeah, and it's just basic, right? It's something that everybody can do right this second, and so it's
Hmm.
easy to do. So the first thing is exercise. The second one is nutrition, right? Doing some form of nutrition that is going to serve you, right? And by the way, there's a direct correlation between if you eat better, you'll exercise more, and if you exercise more, you'll eat better. So like
Mm.
there's a thought of like I don't want to self sabotage myself.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some science on that, and so nutrition plans can be very simple to, and I don't want to turn this into a nutrition bit of podcast episode here, but essentially helping do something through nutrition that cleans things up that makes you feel better is huge. The third is hydration. So making sure that you're hydrating your body too. So anything from that perspective is huge. That's helpful. Four is sleep, right? So obviously I know when there's a lot of stressful situations, that's something that's tougher as well. It's affected. And then the five is some form of supplementation. And so that's where when you're thinking about as a total, and by the way, like I think that there's a ton of stuff, social media nowadays, like can be like the cold plunging and the saunas and the this and the that. And yeah, there's all sorts of ancillary stuff. But if you're doing all that stuff and not hitting those five things I just talked about, it's kind of the glitz and the glamour with the with the 2 cent, execution. And so
Hmm.
I'm a big believer in bringing things back to bases and keeping it simple. Exercising at least 3 times a week, making sure that you're eating, fruits and vegetables, enough protein to put on muscle mass and nutrition, making sure you're sleeping at least 7.5 hours a night, drinking somewhere between a half a gallon to a gallon of water a day, depending on your size, right? And then some form of supplementation that helps you, whether it's multivitamins or whatever, some all sort of that obviously is a whole nother podcast in itself. But in terms of like, the processes, that to me is super important. If it's most of the time when I'm helping people through processes like with what you just talked about, I'm talking about that 97% of the time. And then the other 3% is the other stuff.
Yeah. And everything you're saying, it brings me back to this whole idea about how people going through intense stress really need a team of professionals who get it to help them get through that, to get through it as healthy as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one last thing I would throw at that to kind of like, for that is, in those five pieces that I just talked about that are huge, that's all something you're doing on your own
Hmm.
or you're getting the help of someone else. So I think the sixth kind of thing that I would throw in there for like, again, for this specific demographic that might be watching this
Hmm.
is, getting someone's help. You don't have to do this alone, right? Like if you're like, well, where do I even start in the gym? You can find somebody who can help you. If you're like, well, where do I even start with, you know, nutrition and hydration. There's people like me who can help you. There's, you know what I mean? What do I do for my sleep? There are
Hmm.
sleep doctors out there. Like there are people who do this, right? Supplementation. There are people you can talk with. Like, and honestly, even if it's like, but what do I do with this stress? Like that's literally, there are people that do this. So you don't have to do this all on your own. And that's a lot of what when I have new clients that sign up with me, the biggest thing they talk about is like, I failed doing this on my own for X, Y, and Z reason. And I'm
Hmm.
like, this is why you should come and work with us, because I will prevent X, Y, and Z problem happening, right? For whatever you're doing. And so I think that's another piece of it, is there's not this feeling of like, oh my God, Brian wants me to do these 5 things by myself. It's like, no, you don't have to. You
Right.
can go get someone's help who will coach you through that process. Like it's like what you do. That's what I thought was so cool what you do, right? Like if this is a very stressful situation, it makes a lot of sense to get someone's help to help you move forward on it, right? Like that's huge.
Right. To navigate through it and also help ease the burden, because
Yes.
it's such a weight on people when they're
Yes.
dealing with it.
For
All
sure.
right. Well, Brian, I mean, this has been amazing as always.
Awesome.
How can people find you?
I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can find me on social media. I have so on Instagram, it's btwolf02. My last name has an e on the end, so that kind of, as you can see on the bottom here. So that's an easy one. They can always find my literally my personal cell phone's connected to my Instagram, so I'm a pretty easy guy to find. You can email me. I have Evolution physicaltherapy.com is where our company is, and where they can find us that way. You can always email me at Brian at BRIAN at evolution-pt.com. So I'm pretty open with the communication line. So if anybody's ever wanting to reach out, or LinkedIn, to social media, to whatever, you can always find me online, or on my phone, or email.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.